Hello DCP110 students. Today I will show you how to construct a fleece jogging pant or sweatpant. We need two pattern pieces for this sample. This is the front of the pant. We're going to cut two of these pieces, minding the grain, which will run with the grain of the fleece, which is parallel to the selvage. This single notch in the crotch curve tells you that this is the front. These two notches indicate the fold down for the casing we're going to create for an elastic waistband. And this notch is a matching notch on the outer seam to match the front and the back together. This is the back of the pattern. It also has notches. Some of them indicate, these two indicate that this is the fold down for the casing. This double one on the crotch curve, which by the way is much deeper than the front crotch curve, this tells you this is the back, and this single notch tells you that this is a matching notch on the outer seam for the front. This is the fabric I'm using for this project. It's a fleece, it's a knit fabric. The grain runs parallel to the selvage. Do you see it's not very stretchy with the grain, and it's quite stretchy across the grain. I have cut out my sample pieces. They look like this. Both are cut out of fleece, and I'm going to show you how to notch. But before I do that, I need to move my casing notches because they do not accommodate the width of elastic I have at home. This pattern was developed for a 3/4 inch elastic. I don't have any at home. This is a 1 inch elastic. So the rule for creating a casing is the width of the elastic plus 1/4 inch. You can see I have marked the notches more visibly for you. You can see that when I put the elastic right next to the notch, it takes up all of the casing. So this means if I follow this notch and notch the pattern right here to create my casing, my elastic will be bent, sort of bent in half, and it's going to be prone to twisting. I don't want that. So following the rule, we have the width of the elastic, which takes us to this notch, plus we need to add 1/4 inch. So I'm going to use a different color marker to show you that I am marking 1/4 inch below my current mark on all my pattern pieces. All of them will have a new notch to accommodate the thickness of elastic that I have at home. So for example, if you're working with a thinner elastic, such as 5/8 of an inch elastic, and that's all you have at the moment, you would take 5/8 and add 1/4 inch. That will be the location of your new notch. So now that I have my new notches ready, I'm starting to notch. Fleece is very prone to running when you cut it carelessly, so I'm going to use just the bare tip of my scissor to notch all my pieces. Just the bare tip of the scissor on all of them. And I'm marking at my new casing notches. I'm marking my front crotch curve notch, and now I'm going to mark the back. Again, I'm going to the newly created notch for the casing. Right here, I'm marking the matching notch on the outer seam. I'm marking the double notch to distinguish the front from the back, although it should be obvious because the back crotch curve is a lot deeper. And this is it. For the construction purposes, we're using 1/4 inch on the outer seam, the inseam, and the crotch curve of all the pattern pieces. Before I start sewing this sample, I need to create sewing pairs. So by that I mean I'm going to match one individual back piece to one individual front piece, because two back pieces and two front pieces actually create sewing pairs. If you think of each leg of the pant as a cylinder consists of the front and the back. This is what I'm going to do now. This is the front. I'm going to put it aside, and I'm going to open up the back to lay in the mirror fashion. So the crotch points are facing each other in the mirror fashion. These are laying good sides up. On these two back pieces, so these are both back pieces, I'm going to lay my front pieces crotch curve to crotch curve. Do you see like this? And so this will match them good sides together. Good side is on the inside, okay? It is okay that the crotch curve depth does not match. Of course, the front piece has a much shorter crotch curve and much deeper. because the front of the pant does not need as much room as the back of the pant. So I have created two sewing pairs. I have a front and a back matched with inseams facing, the crotch curve matched, and the outseam facing. And so what I'm going to sew at the sewing machine with a 3.0 stitch length and 1/4 inch seam allowance is I'm going to match my inseams together, and then I'm going to match my outseams together for each pair so that I create two cylinders. I'm now going to sew both pairs of cylinders that we created. Here's my first pair. Do you see that? I have a front paired with the back, and I have an outseam paired with an outseam. So I'm going to sew with 3.0 stitch length, and I am going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm using what I call a generous 1/4 inch. That means that however you're measuring the 1/4 inch on your seam allowance, either you measure it on your stitch plate or you measure it with a foot like I do. This is a 1/4 inch foot. The edge of the fabric should be slightly visible from the outer edge of the foot or running against your measure on the stitch plate. The reason is we're working with a spongy, springy, thick fabric, and it can cause the seam allowance to be slightly reduced when the foot presses down on it. I'm going to start stitching 3.0 stitch length, 1/4 inch, generous 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I am going to backstitch at the beginning and end of the seam. I am sewing the outer seam right now. I have matched the notches I marked for the casing on the outer seam. The next pair of notches I have right here are the notches to match the outseam of the front to the outseam of the back. I'm going to cut the thread now, and I will show you what I have sewn. So I have sewn the outer seam of my first cylinder pair. Okay, so this is my first 1/4 inch seam. Now I am going to go to the inseam, and do you see how they don't match? The front has a shorter crotch curve, that's why they don't match. We're going to make them match. So you just shake it out and match the inseam to the inseam. I'm using directional sewing principle, and I'm starting to sew from top to bottom, just like I did in the previous on the previous seam. The same stitch length, the same seam allowance. I'm trimming the thread. And I will show you what I have now. I have created my first cylinder. The outer seam is shown top to bottom, and the inseam is matched and shown top to bottom. So my cylinder looks like this. I can put my hand through it. Okay, this is the first cylinder created by sewing outer seam and inseam of front to back. I'm going to do the same with the second one. I have sewn and serged two pairs of cylinders containing the front on top and the back of the pant on the bottom. Both of them are identical, and they're facing each other in a mirror fashion. The reason the inseam rolls to the top is because the front crotch curve is a lot shorter, and it's not allowing the back curve to stretch out. This is, if you get something like this, this is what it's supposed to look like. So now it's time to sew the front to the front and the back of the crotch curve. I have my own method, which I find is quite easy to sew this, and I will show you what to do now. One cylinder stays exactly as it is. The second one, I am going to turn good side out. So now we have one that's facing wrong side out, and this one is facing right side out. The one that is right side out, I will put my hand inside it in this fashion, and I'm going to grab with my fingers. I'm grabbing a hold of the bottom of the inseam. Do you see? You can see the crotch curve sort of riding on top. Right now, this is the crotch curve, and this is the bottom of the inseam. And in this fashion, as I'm holding it like this, I'm going to put this inside the other cylinder, which is facing wrong side out, like this. And I am matching inseam to inseam. Do you see? Now, one cylinder is inside the other. Inseams are matching. This is the inseam, this is the inseam. You see, they are ready to be sewn because they're facing each other good sides together. Now I'm going to pin. This is the inseam. To avoid bulk, I'm going to turn one seam allowance one side and the other one to the other side, and this is my first pin. It is nice when inseam seams match, and as you travel up to the top, you will notice that I have a single notch matching the other single notch. They're very small, I'm not sure if you can see that. So I know that I have the front facing the front, and they're ready for sewing. I'm going to put one pin, just holding them together like this, and now I'm going to go to the other side. Now I have a double notch on one side and a double notch on the other. That means the back crotch curves are facing each other, which means you have folded and turned everything correctly. I'm going to put one pin like this, and now they're ready to sew, just as we pin them. I'm now ready to sew the crotch curve. I have pinned and matched the back to the back and the front to the front, and I'm just going to put the whole thing under my sewing machine and start sewing. The seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch. By that I mean generous 1/4 of an inch, and the stitch length is 3. I am going to start with back stitching and end with back stitching. As we come to the inseam, which is pinned right here, make sure that you maintain one seam allowance of the inseam to the left and one to the right to avoid bulk. I will trim the thread and show you the result. So what I have sewn here is one continuous crotch seam. Do you see? You are looking at a crotch curve. There it is. It goes all the way, crosses the inseam, and continues to here. So what to do now is to reach inside and pull out the other cylinder, which is the other leg. And you end up with a perfectly sewn little pair of pants. I'm going to move the camera back so you can see a little bit better. It looks like this. This is one leg, this is the other leg. They look like this, like little doll-sized pants, okay? I'm going to put one leg inside the other again, because the technique I showed you on how to sew in one continuous seam also works extremely well for serging. So here they are. One leg is inside the other leg, exposing that this is the crotch curve, continuous from front to back. And I'm going to use a serger just to serge along all of this. I have sewn and serged the crotch curve, and when I pull the second leg that was tucked inside the first leg out, you will see that this is what I have. I have this little pair of doll-sized pants. After I serged the crotch curve, I also went ahead and I serged the top of my casing. And now is the time to turn down at the notch 1 1/4 inch of my casing, and I'm going to pin it in place. So I'm going to find my center back. This is the back. I'm going to start turning it down. I'm going to find the notch, and if you can't see it, I can mark it again with my elastic. Remember, I have 1 inch elastic. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to find a spot. I think the notch was so tiny. There it is, I see it now. It got serged off. So I'm going to fold it down at the notch, and I'm going to pin it this way. I'm pinning on the sides of the center back seam. The reason is that I want to remind myself that I have to leave an opening after I thread the elastic through. I'm going to sew this closed everywhere but here. These pins that face down vertically are a reminder to me to leave an opening. So now I'm going to use this height to mark the height of all the other seams. These notches are kind of hard to see on fleece. Do you see that? I'm matching one to the other, and they should all be 1/4 inch deeper than the width of elastic. I'm going to put a pin this way. Now I'm going to the front, center front, and I'm going to continue making my casing by pinning it. And the last one, so do you see I used the previous one to mark the next one, like this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to start sewing at one of these vertical pins, and I am going to sew along the thread of the serger. I am sewing right there because this is 1/4 inch up from the edge, and this just gives me enough room for the elastic to slide through comfortably. It's not going to be too deep and it's not going to be too tight. I am now ready to sew down the casing, and as I told you before, I'm going to use the thread of the serger. Do you see the thread that goes straight, just 1/4 inch up from the very bottom? 3.0 stitch length, and I'm going to start at one of my vertical pins that I'm marking the opening at center back, and I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and the end. leaving myself an opening. And I will trim the threads and show you that the casing is now ready, and we can switch our attention to measuring and threading the elastic. So if I turn this good side out, you will see that I have a turned down and sewn casing. This is the inside of it. Everything is serged and sewn, and I left myself an opening to thread my elastic. My little fleece pants are now ready to have the elastic threaded. And first of all, let's talk about what tools to use to thread the elastic. This is called a bodkin. It kind of looks like a giant needle with a very large eye and a blunt, fairly smooth tip. Or if you don't have anything like that, a large safety pin is also good. How much elastic do you need? So if we measure the elastic to exact circumference of the casing, the pants are not going to stay on, of course, not these pants, but the pants on a human-sized person. So I'm going to say if you measure the circumference of the elastic to the full measurement of the pants, do you see that? That's 1 and 2, so we have doubled the width of the pants. This is going to be too much. I'm going to say 2 inches. So I am making elastic 2 inches shorter than the circumference of the pant. I'm going to cut it. And when I connect it, when it's threaded in, I'm actually going to overlap it. Probably 1/4 of an inch like this. It will be overlapped like this, 1/4 inch, maybe 1/2 inch. So in total, it's 2 to 3 inches shorter than the circumference of the pants. Of course, when you're sewing this kind of a garment for your final project, for yourself or for someone who's going to actually wear these pants, you would go by the person's level of comfort. So now I'm going to thread the elastic into the pants. I'm going to use a bodkin. If you use a bodkin, this is how you would use it. You put your elastic through the giant eye of the needle. You see it goes in without any trouble. And sort of thread it through a little bit and then push it all the way down to the blunt rounded tip. Do you see it's like this? This is the eye. And it's at the opposite end. And now you can't get it out, okay? So I will thread the elastic through and show you how to overlap it. I have threaded my elastic through. You can see what I've done. Because my elastic length is 2 to 3 inches smaller than my circumference of the casing, just to ensure that I don't pull too hard on the bodkin and lose the opposite end, I pinned it just to the pant like this loosely so that it doesn't get lost inside. Now I'm going to remove the pin. And I will remove the bodkin. To remove it, slide the elastic towards the eye. And now I am going to overlap it in this fashion, like this. Do you see? Like this. 1/2 inch to 1/4 of an inch on each side is fine. Now I am going to pin it. Just as I'm going to sew it. And I will give this whole thing a little bit of a tug. Because fleece has nap, by that I mean it's fluffy, the fluffs prevent the elastic from moving easily. So why I'm doing this, and see the pin does not allow it to disappear into the casing. I'm doing this to feel for any twists. So sometimes you don't realize, but the elastic is actually twisted inside, and if you sew it shut right now, the twist becomes permanent and becomes very uncomfortable for the person who wears it. So you see, everything is nice and smooth. It is now ready to be sewn in an overlap fashion just like this. I have threaded the elastic through and I secured the end. You can see my opening is still open. This is my casing open. So what is left to do here? I just want you to take a look. Take a final look to make sure that you have distributed the fullness nicely. And you can see, although I removed almost 3 inches from the length of the elastic, my pants are not very tight. Do you see they're barely gathered? So I'm going to repeat that when you're working on your project, or when you're working elasticized waist pants on for a person who is going to wear them, such as yourself or someone else, please make sure that you don't leave the elastic too loose, because this will make wearing up this pants not very comfortable. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do two things to complete the sample. I am going to sew closed the opening that I had left to thread the elastic. I'm just going to continue sewing along the top of the serger thread. And then I'm going to do one more thing, and I recommend that you do this too for this sample, and you need to do this for your project to make sure the elastic never ever comes away or twists in laundry or dry cleaning. What I'm going to do, I will go to the side seams. I have one side seam and the second side seam, and from the right side I am going to stitch in the ditch through the casing and the elastic, and this will forever secure the elastic in place and you will never have any problems. Once you've done this, your sample is complete. This is a completed sample for the fleece elastic waistband pants. I have sewn shut the opening for the casing, and I have sewn, I don't know if you can see, probably not on camera, I have sewn in the ditch, through the side seams, through all the thickness of the fabric and the elastic, just to secure the elastic, and it will never twist on you and never cause you problem after the item is cleaned or laundered.